Britain, a nation steeped in history and grandeur, built on millennium-old stories of labour and of heroism, of innovation and visualisation that are all reflected in its landmarks. Landmarks that identify who we are and where we are. Landmarks that tell us our past and guide our future. I'm Lily Carouse, and I'll be taking you on a journey around the country to discover the great buildings that built our great nation. From a sleepy seaside fishing port to a thriving university town, Bournemouth has been transformed into a cultural and diverse creative hub and one of the most popular seaside resorts in the UK. But how did it come to be? We're going to discover some key landmarks and buildings that made this town what it is. We're here on the south coast to discover the bricks that built Bournemouth. Michael Stead is a librarian and local historian who works here in the Heritage Department at Bournemouth Library. We're going to see what Michael can tell us about Bournemouth's landmarks.
My name is Michael Stead. I work in the Heritage Department up at the library, and we've got a whole lot of old documents and various different things relating to the town, and also we've got access via our computers to a lot of online information that if you want to look up your family, for instance, you get access to Ancestry.
So can you tell us a little bit about the start of Bournemouth, so how it's progressed?
Okay, really the start of Bournemouth goes back to the Napoleonic era, because before that time it was all wide open heathlands and it wasn't actually owned by anybody. You had the lord of the manor and you had various sort of people that had access to it, but none of the land was owned. And the thing that changed all that, the thing that was pivotal, was Napoleon threatening to blockade all the ports of England and basically starve us during the Napoleonic Wars. The idea was that all of this area would be turned over to farmland, and then people would be able to support themselves in the face of Napoleon's threats. In the end, we defeated him, we didn't need it, and so we had all this wide open land, and people sort of think, well, what can we actually do with it? And what happened was that the Lord of the Manor, he started building one or two houses down close to the sea, and they started to be advertised as sort of marine villas. And there's a big suspicion, because the other thing at the time was there's a lot of smuggling going on.
300 years ago, along this coastline, Bournemouth hosted the perfect opportunity for smugglers. Now, the rise in taxes and products entering Britain at the time saw a rise in smuggled contraband, and this occurred primarily at the mouth of the River Bourne, hence the name Bournemouth.
With the buildings that were put along the coastline, and one of them in particular was a little pub that was built. It's sort of very close to the town centre. It doesn't exist anymore. So you can imagine the smugglers, they sort of go in, rush it all in there, and the excise men come along and say, well, could you explain what you're doing with this? Well, I'm running a pub. So of course I've got this. So there's a lot of suspicion that smuggling played a big part in the early days of it as well.
Our first location brings us to the end of the Crimean War and the opening of Bournemouth's first pier in 1856. The very first pier in Bournemouth simply consisted of a small wooden jetty completed in 1856. However, it was eventually replaced by a much longer wooden pier, which opened on the 17th of September 1861. Consisting of an open promenade, it stretched to a length of 838 foot and spanned some 35 foot across the neck of the pier. Bournemouth Pier was substantially demolished by soldiers from the 18th Field Park Company of the Royal Engineers on the 5th of July 1940 as a precaution against German invasion. The pier was repaired and reopened in August 1946. Refurbishment of the pierhead was carried out in 1950, and 10 years later a rebuild of the substructure was completed in concrete to take the weight of the new pier theatre. In 1979, a £1.7 million restoration programme was initiated. While Bournemouth was reaping the benefits of its first pier, the British Empire went to war in South Africa in the Anglo-Zulu War in 1879, which also coincided with the building of St Peter's Church. So is there anything of particular interest of St Peter's Church?
One is the tower on the church itself, which was sort of built slightly later than the rest of the church. On the church, at the top of it, there are four saints that are put there. Now, they were originally meant for a cathedral. I think it might have been towards Bath, where this cathedral was meant to be.
St Peter's Church is the founding church in Bournemouth and sits alongside the churches of St Stephen and St Augustine as part of a trio of churches that form Bournemouth's town centre parish. Mary Shelley holds great significance to the church as well, and thus great significance to Bournemouth and its heritage. The famous English author, known most notably as the author of Frankenstein, was tied to this Dorset town through her son, Sir Percy Florence Shelley, who purchased Boscombe Cottage for his mother Mary as a home. However, Mary died in 1851 and was buried in the churchyard of St Peter's Church in order to be buried alongside her parents. Boscombe Cottage then became Groveley Manor School shortly before World War I, but was then later sold to the council. And now, from a magnificent religious building to an important one, let's have a look at our final location. Our final location brings us to a decade after World War I, in 1929, which saw prices of travelling drop, providing the perfect opportunity for visitors to Bournemouth's very first pavilion.
My name is Christian Knighton. I'm the technical coordinator for the BH Live Trust, who look after the Pavilion Theatre. We operate the Pavilion Theatre and also the Bournemouth International Centre. The building was first thought about in the early 1920s. In fact, 1923, an advert was put in the Daily Telegraph to invite up-and-coming young architects to put forward plans for a new entertainment complex in the centre of the town. Well, the architects were two young architects, Wyville Home and Shirley Knight, both men. And they had just returned from a big grand tour of Europe. Obviously they were very young. This was the first building they'd ever built. But the influence they had of going around Europe made them use a lot of what they saw in Europe and if you come into the foyer you will see straight away terrazzo floors from Italy. You will see a Spanish staircase, a popular design, Egyptian feathering over the doorways, and Roman pillars. So it was a real hodgepodge, but luckily it was successful and it all blended very well together.
So did the pavilion have much of an impact on the local area?
Well, certainly in the 1930s, because Bournemouth was growing so fast with hotels being built all around the town, and we were as popular, or became as popular as Brighton, for visitors from London and the Midlands coming down here. They would spend a week, sometimes 10 days to a fortnight, even in the summer periods.
Bournemouth is very much a forward-thinking modern town. It houses a university that serves over 16,000 students, while the opening of a new £50 million cinema complex is now at the forefront of its entertainment, while its history tells tales of a town fundamental to the shaping of an industrialised Britain. It is also continuing to lay the bricks that are building Bournemouth.